Welcome, Celeste Stacey, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I am doing great, Mike. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks so much for coming on. Today, I have you on as a mindset breakthrough coach, and mindset is something near and dear to my heart. I am a mindset coach, as everyone else is aware, and I just love mindsets, all the nuances to mindset. And I love speaking with other mindset coaches because 5 or 10 mindset coaches into a room, everyone's going to have different perspectives and different takes on certain things. And from there, you can start to look at things in a dynamic view where it's not going to be always a straight shot. So we're going to have a great conversation talking about your work. In your own words, tell the world who you are, what you do, and how you help.
Sure. My name is Celeste Stacey. I am a mindset breakthrough coach. I'm a keynote speaker. I'm an organizational trainer. And I help chronically overwhelmed professionals get their lives back in a nutshell.
What happened to their life in the first place?
What happened to their lives in the first place is that they normalized, they justified, they rationalized, and they absorbed a life of chronic overwhelm that is stealing their joy completely. They are at a point in their life where they're feeling chronically this underlying current of mental restlessness that will not let them feel completely relaxed, will not let them feel free. And that's even if they are away from what they consider to stress them out. Say it's a job, say it's a family situation. Even when they're on vacation, they cannot get rid of that underlying current of mental restlessness that I call a hum. And we could talk about that further. So I help them break free from that hum, and I help them live lives that they actually love, enjoy life again, actually become a participant in something that they actually want for themselves instead of being the fixer, the go-to person, the over supporter in their lives.
I can't imagine many people wanting chronic stress in their life. How is this something that readily available to everyone or seems to be in everyone's lives?
That's a great question, Mike. Nobody wants to be chronically overwhelmed, but I think what happens is people don't really understand what it is because it is conflated with so many different things. It's confused with stress. It's confused with anxiety. It's confused with burnout a lot. And I think it's important to recognize the difference between stress and anxiety and chronic overwhelm. And there's two types of overwhelm, there's acute and there's chronic. And really understanding those various degrees of feelings and how we slowly allow them to creep into our lives, and we call it life. To answer your question, people don't necessarily want those things to come in, but if you don't recognize when something is coming in, you tend to accept it until it gets too late. And so with chronic overwhelm, it is a process, it is not an outcome. Burnout is the outcome of chronic overwhelm. We do not want to get to burnout. And depression is something completely different. That's another thing that is confused with. Until we understand these various degrees, like for example, chronic overwhelm is like the unchecked high blood pressure and unchecked cholesterol that leads to that heart attack or stroke that is burnout. Until we understand those differences, they're always going to creep in. And in various degrees, we all experience them, but it's not until we experience them over an extended period of time that we let them seep into our being until it becomes what we know as our lives, that it becomes that chronic overwhelm, and it's very, very dangerous.
So, chronic overwhelm, it seems like it has many different faces: stress, anxiety, burnout, depression. And I always love to give a picture to the face. Can we give some examples? I know we gave like a blanket one. It could be in your career, it could be in your family, but can we go down the list of examples of something that's a teenager? You might be stressed about a test that you have to take, or you have to do like a recital or something. So you're stressed. It could also be anxious, that you're anxious that someone's not going to ask you out to prom. Like we can go down the list of real life examples. It doesn't matter the age. You can use kids, teens, adult. I think it's going to give a wide range for people to start to see it, because when we talk about stress and anxiety, everyone just kind of lumps it together and then it becomes very confusing until you start to unwrap it and say, this is what this is.
Exactly. And so I'll use like a common example for a work environment. Stress is something that we all experience. Stress is simply body reaction, a physical response to something that is unexpected for us. Take, for example, I love to use either going on an appointment or getting something done at work. So, take, for example, you have a deadline, and that deadline for your work or your school project is moved up, it's moved closer. That is going to invoke some stress in you, right? Oh my goodness, this deadline is shorter. I had this timeline planned out, and now it's due sooner. And all of these emotions are going to start going through your body. It may be anger, it may be frustration, it may be anxiety too. It may be that, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? It may be a whole bunch of things that well up within us, and all of us experience stress. But when you break through that, that stress is gone, right? When you find a way to break through, when you say, okay, this is something I have to deal with, and you get into that cadence, that stress is gone. Anxiety is another level up. Anxiety is a preoccupation with worrying and what if. So, in that same situation where your deadline was moved up and you're stressed out, anxiety is saying, oh my goodness, what if I don't get this done? And if I don't get this done, what if that's going to affect my future prospects if you're in school? What if that's going to affect my grades? If this affects my grades, what if I don't get into the school I want to get into? If it's a work situation, what if that I'm not going to get that promotion? What if my review is bad? That's anxiety, all of those what ifs. And we can go into a downward spiral with the what ifs. On top of that, there's overwhelm. And there's two types of overwhelm. There's acute overwhelm and there's chronic overwhelm. Acute overwhelm in that situation, in addition to all of those feelings that we just talked about, acute overwhelm is, oh man, I'm working on this. Now I have to focus on this. And that means that I have to ignore all this other stuff. My emails piling up, all this other work that I have to now ignore. And because I have to now ignore all of that work and it's piling up, it's going to set me back for this other stuff. This is just too much. That's acute overwhelm. And acute overwhelm is picture taking like a snow globe. Have you ever seen a snow globe, Mike? Okay, picture taking a snow globe and shaking it up. When you shake up that snow globe, all the snow's all over the place. It looks like chaos. You can't see, and then it settles, right? And if something shakes you up again, and then it settles. That is acute overwhelm. That is overwhelm in the moment to a situation that gets us heightened in stress and anxiety, and then it settles. Overwhelm encompasses stress, it encompasses anxiety, but they're not the same, right? They're not equal. People confuse it. Chronic overwhelm in that situation is when stress and anxiety and acute overwhelm happen so much and we normalize it so much that it is no longer heightened. It becomes like more of a duller feeling. We still feel a sense of helplessness, but we feel like there's nothing that we can do about it. We just normalize it. Pretty soon we justify it and rationalize it, and it becomes part of us. Burnout is outside of that. That is the extreme. Burnout is the outcome of unchecked chronic overwhelm. And burnout is literally a ceasing to function. So when you get to burnout, you are at the point where some people may call it a breakdown. Some people may call it like this traumatic event. When you are at burnout, you are literally ceasing to function. You are no longer productive, or your productivity is 10% or less. You are emotionally depleted to the point where you are ready to go into some sort of institution, or you are at the point of extreme crisis. That is burnout. Depression is something completely different. And these all can be confused with each other because they have symptoms that overlap and they look the same. Depression is, and when I speak to people who are in depression or feel depressed, they tell me that depression feels like it is a struggle to go on just one more day. It is a struggle to stay alive just one more day. That's what depression looks like. Chronic overwhelm is not that. They should not be confused. And that's why it's so important to know the difference in all of these varying degrees, because God forbid we confuse depression with chronic overwhelm and burnout. They're not the same. This is a matter of saving a life if we do.
When we start to look at all of these different areas, we have to begin to look at the individual. If we look at generations, for example, the baby boomers are a good example of people who have been through war. They have gone through it. And one of the mindsets that baby boomers have to the generation Alpha or maybe Gen Z generations is that they are very weak-minded. They have a very fragile type of demeanor where they won't do something to mess up their nails or they don't want to mess up their new Jordans. They have a different way of looking at things. And if you messed up a baby boomer's shoes or something, they'll probably say, it's just a pair of shoes. But if you mess up Gen Z, maybe even a millennial shoes, oh my God, it's the end of the world. Where has this normalization of, I guess you can say, all of these chronic things from stress, anxiety, we can be depressed that our shoes got messed up. I mean, we are living now in new mindsets. And is this something that's going to be systemic to society where it's just as we go on, there's going to be things that just become normalized because it's easy? Or is it something that unknown to it?
And so, what I'm hearing is because the world changes around us, does that mean that considered normal back then, where we had to just like suck it up? I'm not a baby boomer, but they had to just suck it up and they were like, oh, you guys are soft. You know, the things now that we're living in, this culture now is normalizing certain things where we say, I feel injured by this thing, like the Me Too movement, which is very important. For example, body positive movement, where there are people who are tired of being bullied for having more weight, having obesity. There's a body positive movement that says, hey, we're okay. And I feel injured now that you're talking about me. When we talk about the changes in generations and the changes in cultural environments, yes, there are changes in those environments. However, we're still individuals and we have internal worlds and wars that we're fighting. So for someone from another time or even from another experience in this time to say, oh, that's not even something that you should be worried about, get over it or whatever, they don't see your story. Each of us has a story, and that story started in our formative years, arguably. We take a lot of guilt and shame from our years up to the age of 18. From that, we make certain decisions. From that, we form different perspectives of the world. And from those perspectives, we either become overwhelmed or we don't. Each person is different. So, for example, you can have two kids, even twins, grow up in the same household with the same experience. However, the meaning that each of them gives to that experience could be completely different. Why? Because we're individuals. Even if someone tells us to think a certain way, the mind is a funny thing and it's going to go its own way anyway. One twin can say to the other twin, we grew up in the same household. Stop your complaining. But that's that twin's view. The other twin is saying, you know what? I saw the same thing that you saw. And this is the meaning I got from it. This is the experience I had. There is no, oh, we grew up in a culture that's normalizing things. And so our mindsets are shifting in the same way. It will never shift in the same way personally. Culturally, yes. Personally, no, because we're individuals.
I have a story. I'm not because I say it quite a bit on the podcast, and I think I said it for past guests because it's just a brilliant story about the idea of perception. And it's very similar to what you said, how you can have two twins with just different views on how they grew up. And even in, my family, I have a brother, I have a sister, we have different views on how we grew up. I love growing up without lights and hot water and stuff like that. It made me tougher. I feel that made me a better person. However, some people will look at the situation. I can't believe you had to go through that. That was probably miserable. No, that was a blast because I learned that those things, hey, we can appreciate them or we can pedalize them. You were like saying, yeah, this thing right here is something I need. I want to live this grandiose life. And we get the view of an American dream. And it's not so much about talking just about the American dream. It's the idea of the end goal of what people want. They want maybe a house, right? The idea of home ownership. Maybe they want to start a family and they want to have a career where they can be successful, right? So we give ourselves a foundation, a blanket that we are going to go after. And if we don't get one of them, right? So we have our goals and we're not able to get them for some reason, or it's very difficult. We're not a homeowner. No one likes us. And we're not finding love. Our career, we don't like it. Our boss is a jerk or whatever. It's a bad situation. So now we start to feel like we're not worthy anymore because we're not even able to get the things that we dreamed of or the things that we once have idolized. How can we start to make steps toward progress when we feel inadequate?
That's a great question. So, all of those things that you just mentioned, the house, the car, all of these things, they are what I call the shoulds. It's natural when you grow up in a society that normalizes those shoulds and says, here is the bar, these are the standards, this is what you need to make to be feel like you're worth anything, to show your worth. The first thing, and this is one of the hardest things to do, is challenge the stories you tell yourself about yourself in relation to the shoulds. When I talked about the fact that in our formative years, we create stories, and from those stories, we make decisions that change the trajectory of our lives potentially. As we get older and we become adults, we make more stories. And in those moments of decision are a whole lot of shoulds. And when we encounter a should and say, oh my goodness, I don't have this thing. And because of that, I do not feel worthy. It's important to really analyze and evaluate your own personal definition of value. So, for example, I work with people who are really conflicted by those shoulds. And so, for one person, this person mentioned that they always wanted this huge house or whatever. But when they really looked at their lifestyle and where the house was located, they realized that what they liked, they wanted to live by the water. They loved seeing people walk by their window. And where that house was located, they would get none of that. And they said, well, why am I so fixated on this particular house? Because that house represented a certain status in society. That house was a way to say, hey, you've made it. However, instead of looking at a living space, I challenge to look at a lifestyle. How do you want to live? How do you want to feel most of it? And when people are able to focus on themselves as individuals, how they want to feel most of the time, then they really realize that there are a plethora of things open to them that doesn't necessarily play into the shoulds, but they create their own sense of value within. It's not as easy as just saying it because we are so deeply rooted in it. And that's why it's very, very important to be able to work with someone who can help you root that out. The first thing is to challenge the stories you tell yourself about yourself in relation to these shoulds.
I love the idea about the shoulds too, because we should do a lot of things. We should be happy. We should go to the gym. We should eat healthy. We should be good sons and daughters. We should be great citizens. I mean, we have a lot of burden because now all of these shoulds are weighing on us, and now we're more stressed. Maybe we're anxious if we're doing it right or wrong. Looking at yourself as a person that is trying to juggle a lot. And this happens a lot with families that have a kid coming into the mix, right? Because they feel like they should do something to this kid or for this kid, right? I should be a good dad. I should be a good mom. I should be present. If my kid wants to talk to me or come in the office, I should put everything down to pay attention to them. And there's different schools of thought when it comes to raising a child. I do want to get your take on mindset because we talked about how culture and generations can kind of move on. And I'm not sure if you have heard the statistic. Millennials are the most active generation in their kids' life. I believe 71% of millennials are extremely active in their kids' life. And the reason is because their parents were not in their life. They wanted their parents to say, I love you, son. I love you, daughter. Going to their games and recitals and doing things with them, playing with them, running with them. Now they're filling in that gap that they didn't have when they were growing up. But the issue, even though it's not an issue yet, is that child is going to have that and they could take it for granted because they don't understand what they had. Sometimes we have to look at the things that happen, the things that are missing for us to start to make some changes, for us to say, you know what, that wasn't good. I want to make the changes. But if it was always present, we can take it for granted. There's a whole dynamic to that. But what's your take on raising children, going on to next generations, and then filling in the gaps that we might have felt were missing for us.
So I have personally witnessed what you said with the trend with millennials. My nephew and his wife and the millennials that I see, they are so dedicated to their children. Now, everyone has a different story. If you had a story where maybe you didn't have a parent there or something, you realize, and these millennials all over the place who are very involved and were in that situation, realize that their parents' story didn't have to be their story and their kid's story doesn't have to be what they experienced. Also, again, I emphasize that every person's story is unique. If you grew up in a nuclear family, whether it was back then or now, and of course, it's your frame of reference, it's something you take for granted. Whereas in the future, something happens in your relationship where there's only one parent, maybe another parent died or something like that. It's still about the meaning you give it. There's no hard, fast rule about the fact that someone may or may not have grown up in an environment that looked like somebody else's. It is truly the meaning that they give it. Just like you said, Mike, when you grew up with your siblings without electricity, you saw it as an adventure, you saw it as a growth building type of thing. And they may have looked at it and said, that really stunk. That was horrible. It's going to be the same way with everyone else in those situations. The one thing to know, and what I love to say, is that you are the constant. No matter what environment you are thrown into, no matter the chaos, no matter the people around you, the most important thing to know is, who am I? What's my story? How do I feel about this outside of what it's supposed to look like? So many of us miss the jewels that are all around us in life because we think something is supposed to look a certain way. And we're looking for that one thing that looks like that. And all around us is the answer. I invite your listeners, your viewers, when you're in a situation where you're just like, I took it for granted that my parents were there for me. I'm just going to take it for granted that my kids are going to have the same thing or whatever. I invite you to broaden your view of what support looks like, of what love looks like, of what wholeness looks like in the context of raising a child. Does wholeness look like a couple that's together that's always fighting, but hey, you got both parents, right? Or does wholeness look like a loving, supportive environment that may be raised by one person, a community, a grandmother, a grandfather, a sibling, an aunt, and uncle? What does that look like? And what is the outcome that I want the recipient of my love to look like? What is that outcome that I want them to have? So if I'm raising a child, does it really matter how many people are raising that child with me? Or does it matter that that child feels healthy, whole, and supported?
It's powerful because sometimes to stay in our story, where if we don't have a perfect situation, because we can easily look at other people's situations, we can look at movies with the happy endings probably 95% of the time. And then when we don't have that happy ending ourselves, we say, boo hoo, why me? And we do have to begin to take action too, but understand where we're coming from. Because if we are just going to take action where someone else has begun, we are not going to be taking our journey for what it truly is. We have to start from where we are. That means if you have no lights or no power and stuff like that, my kid will probably never go through that. But at the same time, I'll probably take them camping, and then for them to understand the aspect that what we have is because we make progress. I know what I want to do as a parent is progress. I want to teach progress. How, if we're here and we're in a good place, how can we be better, right? Even if it's just a fraction better. And then even if you choose to stay the same, is there a benefit to that? If you choose to take a step back, what's the benefit to that? Because maybe I created something like this whole podcast and like the whole business. This is a lot of work. I don't expect for my kids to carry this, torch, this baton. It is daunting. And I don't expect everyone to do what I do because I understand that everyone has a different mindset, different work ethic, they have their own life. My life is not going to be instilled onto my kids. They get to choose to walk their own path, and I'm going to be there to support them in whatever path they want to go on. Because I can't be one of those baby boomers saying, "Oh, in my generation, I had no power, no lights, and I had to eat moldy bread." Like, there is no benefit for me to do that. Only benefit is to make sure that they have the best situation, that they can propel themselves in whatever direction that they want to go. And if they fall for some reason, you're there to catch them, you're there to support them. That is my view on parenting in a nutshell. And you know what? I could talk to you probably all day. I could probably, me and you could do 3 hours of conversation
Absolutely.
and we will have a wonderful conversation. I just love talking mindset with other mindset coaches. And I can tell that you truly love your work. And I can tell that your clients, they're in really good hands. But I do want to wrap this up. But before we do that, I want to get some final words from you and then for you to tell the audience where they can find you.
Absolutely, Mike. Thank you. And of course, it's a pleasure to be here. And I feel like we could talk forever too. I love speaking with like minds. What I would leave with your audience is that if you find that you are having difficulty feeling completely relaxed, no matter what you do, if you find it difficult to focus on one thing without feeling like it's at the expense of another, if you label yourself a perfectionist, if you're the type of person who ruminates and your mind's constantly running, those are signs of chronic overwhelm. It does not get better. Get help because it leads to worse things. As far as where to find me, I'm going to leave this special link for your listeners, celestestacey.com, and that's Stacey with an EY /talk. If you feel you're in that situation, 100% free. You can connect with me. We'll determine whether you are really in chronic overwhelm. And if you are, we'll talk about next best steps to help you get your life back. And they can also connect with me directly on LinkedIn at Coach Celeste Stacey and on Instagram, which my Instagram is anorexic. I want followers. And that is at Coach Celeste Stacey.
Perfect. And I'll make it easy for everyone. All the links are going to be in the description box below. So click those links, follow her, connect with her, learn more about what Celeste is doing to help individuals, help the world be in a better mindset, be in a better place. Because as she said, we all have a story, but we can't always let our story define us. So I want to thank you so much, Celeste, for coming on, talking about your work, and being a wonderful person.
Thank you, Mike. It's been a pleasure.